tutti e a tutte. Abbiamo passato qualche minuto dall'orario previsto, adesso se potete chiudere le immagini, grazie. Avete visto che c'è la possibilità di avere le cuffie per ascoltare la traduzione, le avete già prese, così evitate di alzarvi durante l'iniziativa. No, la conferenza è nella prima parte in italiano, dopo tutto in inglese. Prendete le cuffie proprio nel box là sopra, adesso ve lo dà Alberto che ci aiuta. Se ti servono le cuffie per la traduzione dall'inglese all'italiano, ok?
E devi dire il canale dove inserirli se stai parlando.
Sì, allora il canale 2, 1 è quello dell'inglese, solo uno adesso, ok. E ci sono state le variazioni, scusate, il canale è solo il canale 1 per la traduzione. Ecco, grazie.
Ma dov'è? Ecco, adesso te lo faccio.
Ecco, intanto affrontate tutte le perplessità rispetto all'ascolto della traduzione, così poi partiamo tranquilli con la presentazione. Intanto vi ringrazio per essere arrivati qui in piazza Oberdan, nella sala regionale, anche perché ci sono molte iniziative in città. E quindi aver scelto questa iniziativa qua va molto molto bene, grazie. Anche perché è una sala regionale. Noi nel 2026, proprio adesso all'inizio del 2026, come Salam Ragazzi dell'Olivo Comitato di Trieste, insieme alla lista civica Open di Fulvio Ons, consigliere regionale, abbiamo pensato di indire questa iniziativa cogliendo l'opportunità di avere qui in regione il dottor Tomo Potokar, che sarà poi in dialogo con il giornalista Alias Bredez. Detto questo, perché abbiamo fatto questa iniziativa? Perché innanzitutto nel 2026 circa 37 ONG e oltre sono state espulse da Gaza e da tutta la Palestina. Poi la cooperazione internazionale viene comunque interrotta nella fattispecie dell'ONU o di altre organizzazioni, quindi manca quello che è l'aiuto e sostegno al diritto di avere la possibilità di guarire, tra virgolette, dai conflitti. Non c'è la possibilità a Gaza e in Palestina, ma anche in altri posti del mondo. Noi ci occupiamo oggi di Palestina e di Gaza. Questa opportunità non c'è. In questo momento, oggi proprio, in questi giorni, le tende di Gaza le vediamo tutti e tutte. Sono sotto le raffiche di vento, sotto la pioggia, senza nessuna copertura utile, senza nessuna affiliazione, senza nessun aiuto. Ecco, questo ancora di più aggrava la difficoltà, perché oltre a esserci un genocidio c'è anche la volontà di non permettere l'aiuto in sé a questa popolazione. Questo è gravissimo, perché vuol dire sterminare una popolazione. Noi eravamo in questa sala, anzi non eravamo in questa sala, avevamo richiesto questa sala il 2 febbraio del 2023, molto prima dell'ottobre 2023, in occasione della presentazione del rapporto sull'apartheid in Palestina di Amnesty International. Avevamo qui ospite Tina Marinari, che è referente della campagna internazionale per Amnesty, però la sala non ci è stata concessa e all'epoca abbiamo dovuto di fretta e furia trovare un'altra sala, perché questa sala non ci è stata concessa. Perché parlavamo di Palestina, perché volevamo denunciare quello che diceva il rapporto di Amnesty rispetto all'apartheid. Oggi, a 3 anni di distanza, senza segnare tutte le tappe che già le sapete, le cose sono andate non male, malissimo. Un genocidio che è ancora in atto, tutte le malversazioni, la catastrofe umanitaria, ma anche le infrastrutture, la mancanza di scuole e di ospedali, delle cure di bisogni fondamentali, che sono il cibo, l'acqua, il freddo vero un riparo, l'istruzione, l'ospedale con la cura. Ecco, oggi abbiamo pensato che fosse davvero interessante sentire Tomo Potokar, il professor dottor Tomo Potokar, rispetto alla sua esperienza, rispetto alla sua testimonianza, e il dialogo con cui il giornalista alias Redes, con cui abbiamo già collaborato in passato, darà vita a questa testimonianza. Intanto io chiamo tra poco il professor Furio Hauser per l'introduzione a questa giornata, chiedendogli anche che se la cooperazione internazionale dovrebbe anche, come dire, avere un ruolo di contrasto ai conflitti, perché attraverso la cooperazione ONG, ma all'ONU anche stesso e al diritto internazionale noi dovremmo riuscire a creare quegli spazi in cui i conflitti si demoliscono. Che ruolo ha la nostra regione, se ce l'ha, se ci sarà spazio, cosa si può fare? Noi come esperienza di Salam, in una regione di molti anni fa, e qua concludo, tra il 90 e il 2000, con l'assessore Antonaz, avevamo avuto la possibilità di un aiuto monetario congruo per poter comprare un'ambulanza e mandarla a Nablus e fare del training anche per gli operatori sanitari. Credo che questo ora non sia più possibile. E quindi ecco, c'è stato anche un salto di qualità rispetto alla possibilità di sostegno a contrastare il conflitto. Grazie Furose. Poi avremo con noi Tomo Potokar e Aliash Bradez e Nada Predna che con me conduce la giornata. Prego Furio.
Dunque, buonasera anche da parte mia a tutte e a tutti. Io ringrazio ancora Lorella Bucci e Salam, i ragazzi dell'Olivo, che hanno reso possibile questa giornata. Qualche breve considerazione. Sì, io gli sono riconoscente proprio perché, come è stato ricordato nel febbraio del 23, avevamo proprio in programma di presentare il documento di Amnesty International che era dal titolo Israel's Apartheid Against the Palestinian People. E avevamo prenotato tutto ovviamente secondo quelli che sono i dettami del regolamento, ma pochi istanti prima ci dissero che la sala non ce la concedevano. Oggi il motivo per il quale anche forse vi interrogherete sul titolo un po' indiretto che c'ha l'evento di oggi era proprio per cercare di scongiurare che appunto venisse poi alla fine tolto l'autorizzazione, il che veramente è gravissimo quello che avvenne allora, ma sarebbe stato altrettanto grave adesso, perché questa è una sala pubblica, è una sala vostra, è una sala dei cittadini di questa regione, per affrontare le tematiche che riguardano appunto la nostra regione e soprattutto per poter conoscere. Dunque chiuderla, anche in questa occasione hanno cercato di farlo perché, come voi sapete, c'è al momento il tema del referendum e dunque c'è il tema dello par condicio, e il mio appunto qui caposegreteria Alberto Vanin ha lottato ieri con i denti per evitare che venisse fuori che appunto per motivi di par condicio o altro ci impedissero l'utilizzo, e infatti siamo qui. Quindi lasciatemi innanzitutto di ringraziare ovviamente anche il dottor Tomo Potokar e dargli il benvenuto. So I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Tomo Potokar and also the giornalista che introdurrà, Aliash Krebets. So you're welcome. Yeah. E appunto la domanda è: che cosa può fare la regione? Questo è il titolo, non è una domanda retorica, non è una domanda peregrina. Purtroppo anche ieri avrete sentito, l'ho letto sui giornali, che Federica, il nostro presidente, ha dichiarato che non crede nell'ONU, non crede nelle organizzazioni, e ha citato proprio espressamente come motivo di questo suo disprezzo e sfiducia dell'ONU proprio l'ente che si occupa dei rifugiati. No. ha citato precisamente quello. E quindi capite bene che il clima è un clima di assoluta indifferenza, ma io penso che qui, non voglio portare via troppo tempo, io penso che qui noi stiamo vivendo in questi anni veramente un punto di svolta etico, perché se non riaffermiamo il principio etico vuol dire che abbiamo abdicato assolutamente a quello che è l'etica, quella che è appunto la legge del più forte, che abbiamo visto adesso nell'occasione di quanto è avvenuto in Venezuela, no? Dove appunto chi è più forte vince e non deve giustificarlo a nessuno solamente perché è il più forte. Netanyahu ha, diciamo, promosso questa politica della forza, giustificando appunto qualunque tipo di violenza da decenni, perché è al governo da decenni in Palestina. Non solo, ma è diventato un centro di esportazione, no? Israele, di forme di repressione, di controllo, di compressione dei diritti, anche, diciamo, con tutto uno sviluppo tecnologico che vendono a tutti senza nessuna considerazione e senza nessun rispetto nemmeno per quelli che sono gli impegni anche che la stessa Unione Europea si era posta di fronte al tema dei palestinesi. Dunque hanno violato apertamente qualunque tipo di principio. Dunque siamo veramente a un punto di svolta, quindi io penso che quello che noi stiamo facendo oggi è un esercizio di resistenza etica, un piccolo presidio di resistenza etica. Alla domanda appunto che cosa può fare la regione può fare di tutto, per esempio può non dire quello che dice il suo presidente. Se non vi voglio, diciamo così, scandalizzare troppo nel dire quanti soldi sono stati, diciamo, sperperati anche nell'ultimo assestamento di bilancio di questa regione, appunto che è una regione molto ricca per le cose più inverosimili. Non lo dico perché di fronte alle immagini che abbiamo visto fare delle ironie sarebbe assolutamente inappropriato, e quindi non lo dico, ma potete immaginare soltanto appunto ieri 65 milioni annui, 65 milioni, perché quello che dava l'Unione Europea per Gaza, per l'UNRWA, mi sembra fosse, no, quello che dava l'Italia all'UNRWA, mi sembra fosse 20 milioni l'anno. E noi hanno deciso 60 milioni per poter garantire lo sconto sulla benzina. Sulla benzina. Questo è in tutta la regione, secondo tutte le formule. Quindi questa è solo una misura di quanto ci sia una sproporzione, no? Cioè veramente enorme tra quello che succede altrove e quello che succede qui. Detto questo, io appunto vorrei augurarvi una conferenza utile. Sappiamo bene che anche forse io ascoltavo appunto che, non so, ma sono parecchie ancora, diciamo, parecchie decine di bambini morti a Gaza, no? Anche recentemente di freddo, no? Quindi la situazione non è assolutamente risolta e il tema dell'apartheid è ancora più direi aggravato da quello che sta avvenendo. So let me wish you all, finished, let me wish you all a very fruitful meeting tonight, and I hope that this event will stand as a resistance meeting towards what I think is a very critical and serious moment in history that we're living. Quindi buona conferenza a tutti, per come può essere buona una simile conferenza.
Grazie, accomodatevi pure. Volevo solo avvisare, se a qualcuno le immagini che avete già intravisto sono immagini abbastanza forti, quindi state presenti sul pezzo. Grazie.
Buonasera, io ho 2 parole soltanto per i nostri relatori. I'm just going to introduce you briefly. Don't check me out, believe me. Dunque oggi abbiamo un incontro con il dottor Tomo Potokar. Il dottor Potokar è un esperto, è un chirurgo esperto in ustioni e in chirurgia plastica. Ha alle spalle più di 30 anni di esperienza in territori di guerra, in moltissimi paesi che non sto qui ad elencare, però vi dico che è stato ben 16 volte a Gaza. L'ultima volta è stata la scorsa primavera e spera di rientrare anche fra pochi mesi, se gli sarà concesso. Aggiungo anche che il dottor Potokar è cofondatore di Interburns, che è una NGO che si occupa soprattutto nella formazione di personale specializzato in ustioni e in chirurgia plastica. Poi non so se anche di questo parleranno. E poi abbiamo qui con noi Aliash Vrabets che dialogherà con il dottor Potokar. È un giornalista del quotidiano Delo di Lubiana, che forse qualcuno di voi conosce sicuramente. Aliash Vrabets ha scritto molto sulla Palestina e continua a scrivere sulla Palestina, su Gaza, sulla Cisgiordania, Gerusalemme Est. È stato lui stesso in Palestina ed ha avuto modo di condurre più interviste con esponenti sia palestinesi come anche con persone che con la Palestina hanno un rapporto, come appunto il dottor Potokar. Ed è stato proprio grazie a questa combinazione, diciamo, tra il dottor Potokar e Aliash Vrabets che abbiamo avuto la possibilità anche di invitarlo qui a Trieste. Per cui adesso io vi ringrazio, passerò la parola e dico per l'ultima volta, per chi vuole avere le cuffie, sono in uno scatolone vicino alle cabine, canale 1, e si inseriscono a sinistra del vostro sedile. Bene, grazie.
All yours.
Buonasera, good evening, dobar večer. Tomo, we are happy to host you here. And as Nada said, you're planning to go back to Gaza in March, if Israel will allow you. And what kind of Gaza do you expect compared to the Gaza you left almost 1 year ago?
Grazie. Primo, buonasera a tutti e tutto. Mi dispiace, stasera devo parlare in inglese, spero la prossima volta sarà in italiano. So, thank you, Aliash, for that question. I have been, as you heard, I've been to Gaza many times since 2018. And I have seen a small strip of land. We have to remember that Gaza is very small, but with a very large population of roughly 2 million people, has been utterly devastated, has been changed from a coastal, relatively urban area with big cities like Gaza City, Khan Yunis, whilst an imprisoned population to an extent, but still were able to live their lives. To the last time I was there, the amount of destruction is unbelievable. I have really never seen anything in all the other conflict zones I've been to with so much destruction in such a small area. And it's not just the buildings, which I think somewhere in the region of 95% of the buildings within Gaza have been either damaged or totally destroyed, but also the systems, the infrastructure, the transport system, the targeting of the health system, the education system. I last left in June last year, and since then, obviously, the bombardments have continued without cease up until we had this so-called ceasefire, despite the fact that since that ceasefire, over 400 people have been killed, and there are still ongoing brutalities every day. So I think and I have colleagues that are there at the moment. The situation is, the only positive thing perhaps to say is there is less bombardment on a daily basis than there has been in the past. But it is a population that's living mostly in tented facilities or in bombed out houses. And of course at the moment as well, with winter there, we know recently there's been a lot of flooding, it's been very cold. And I think there's a perception sometimes that, we hear a lot less about Gaza now because of this so-called ceasefire. But the reality is Gaza cannot get back on its feet in the next days, weeks, months or years. This will take decades to rebuild what has been destroyed there.
And some people say that everything is just grey and dust. Can you describe us a little bit how is when you walk in Gaza? What do you see? What is it?
So, I mean, I was brought up in, I am half Slovene in fact, but I was brought up in the United Kingdom in England, and I remember as a child watching a lot of films about the Second World War. It was very frequent when I was a kid. And walking through Gaza, parts of Gaza, it is like walking through some of those images from the films that I used to watch about the Second World War. It looks like Stalingrad or Dresden. You know, the amount of destruction is just phenomenal. You walk or drive, because it's difficult to walk, it's not safe, but when you drive past, you just see bombed out houses, hospital structures, schools for kilometres and kilometres, with twisted metal and just millions and millions of tons of rubble all over the place. One area, particularly in the south, so in Rafah, which I've been many times worked in Rafah. It's just in the northern part of Rafah where the European Gaza hospital was, and that was a big town and a sizable city. And it has not only just been bombed flat; the rubble has even actually been cleared from there. So it's almost as if it didn't exist. It's just been removed, cleared out. Other areas, it's just left these just building after building after building, and I'm sure some of you will have seen the satellite images, taken where you just see it. And if the only thing I could equate it to is perhaps in 2005 I was in Pakistan after the earthquake, and in Muzaffar it looks a bit like that, where every house has just been flattened. But within that, you still have people that are living, who are trying to survive, who are, trying to eke out a life, who are, living amongst all this rubble. Kids still trying to, to play out on the streets. So despite all that, people still, will try to live their lives as best they can.
Another thing is the sound. There is constant sound of drums above you, and like there is not even 1 second of silence. How difficult is this to survive?
Yeah, I mean that's a type of psychological warfare, I guess, as well. Is these drones are constant, as you say, day and night, and they're depending how high they are and what size of drone they are, they make a different noise. But it's something that it's a bit like, if you have a mosquito or a fly who's flying around your ear, you're sort of trying to slap it because it's just not, but it just goes on all the time. And it can become, it's not static either. It's not just a constant. It'll come up, come down, be louder, be quieter, maybe a little pause, and then it'll come back. And it's amazing how that kind of gets to you, much more in fact than the bombardments. I mean, I remember waking up in October, November 23, so right at the beginning, and just sort of shouting, these at 2 o'clock in the morning, because just all the time above your head, and it's just, yeah. And I mean, when I go for 4 weeks, for 6 weeks, for 2 weeks, whatever. You know, people that are, the Palestinians that are living there have been putting up with that every day. And to be honest, it's not just that. I was also working in Lebanon, in Beirut, and same. These drones, it's part of modern conflict, is this use of drones both for surveillance and for targeting and for, you know, actually being used to deliver weapons.
Is it possible to shoot them down? Or? I mean,
that's a good question. I've never tried. But I mean, it's a very interesting question because most of the time you can't see them. You hear them, you can't see them. But I have seen them now. You know, occasionally you can see them if they're low enough. I mean, the answer is yes. I think you can. Some people have managed to bring that. And again, it depends on the size and what type they are and stuff. But I think you need probably relatively. I think trying to sort of, you know, use a gun or something to shoot them down, I think is quite tricky. But I mean, I'm sure technology exists to try and intercept them. And the other ones, of course, are these so-called quadcopter drones. So these are, you know, the 4 little propellers, but they're attached to them are you know, weapon systems that fire high velocity weapons. So they will circulate above and then, you know, shoot down into a crowd or you know, into people. And so that's you know, and as we've seen in Ukraine as well with the use of drones, you know, that is, as I say, that is modern warfare, is behind computer screens and, you know, using drones from the more sophisticated weapon systems. I mean, on the other side, on the Gazan side, the Palestinian side, it's, you know, Kalashnikovs and a few, you know, fairly simplistic weapons, nothing very sophisticated.
Your profession is plastic surgery, you heal burns. Can you describe us what is in the hospital? You're there from morning to the evening. How is when there is a blast and you know that there will be beds of hundreds of patients? Where do you start? Which person you take first to the operating room?
I mean, it's very difficult, and obviously it changes, you know, every time is a bit different, but I tend to be based in the operating theatre, and so patients will come to the emergency department and then go through a process of triage to identify those that are in most urgent need of surgery, and then they will be brought through to the operating theatre. And the problem is, I mean, conflict has been going on in Gaza for many years, and obviously many other countries around the globe, and there's a lot of knowledge around what to do in theory, and a lot of people who are experts in theory about how to manage mass casualty events, and you can read about it in books, and you know, this is how you do it, and you set up a system, and the patients arrive in an ambulance, and the most serious ones, they go into the emergency room. You have all the staff there to, you know, go through and say, okay, this one is urgent, this one is not urgent. They're transferred into theatre. Yeah, that's great in books, but that's not how the real world works. And the reality is that you have a casualty department that's already full, and then the normal, typical scenarios, you'll hear a drone closer and closer, louder and louder, and then before you know it, you'll hear a few explosions, massive explosions, and then quickly afterwards, a few minutes maybe, you'll hear sirens of the emergency services going to collect these patients, which is an extremely risky procedure in itself. And then patients will arrive in the hospital, and they'll arrive on the back of a donkey cart, they'll arrive 15 on the back of a truck, some of whom are dead, some of whom are alive. They'll arrive in private vehicles, they'll arrive in an ambulance. There'll be huge amounts of shouting and screaming as friends and family and other people trying to help all rush into the emergency room at the same time, with completely overwhelming the services, and there's not enough staff to do the effective triage amongst very loud and insecure circumstances. And all the operating theatres are full anyway because they're already doing emergency cases, so then you have to try and decide which case can stop or finish as soon as possible to allow the other cases to get through. And you have to make, tough decisions have to be made around, can this patient be saved? And if, if the extent of injury is such that it's extremely unlikely to save them, well, you have to take a practical approach and say, well, this one should be the priority because they have a higher chance of survival. And of course, within that mix, you have the fact that certainly with my experience, and I've only worked in sort of public hospitals, the majority of all the times I've been there, in 2018 with the Great March of Return, the vast majority of the patients were young men between 16 and 30. Since October 23, the vast majority that I've seen and operated on have been women and children.
And another problem is that many of these patients, they need long recovery. It's not just one operation and they're good, especially when you have burn skin needs, one checkup next day, next week, in 1 month. How is this in Gaza?
It's very, very difficult because it's very much an emergency service of trying to save lives and save limbs. And although everyone is aware of the need for long-term rehabilitation, it's just not feasible at the moment. You have to kind of turn the tap off first, and when there's still so many patients coming in every day. And these are, again, depending on the time frame and when we're talking about, so in 2018, these were all high energy transfer bullet wounds, the vast majority to the limb, the legs, but with big wounds and very complicated fractures, most not life-threatening, but limb-threatening, and require multiple operations and a recovery period of 18 months to 2 years to get to the final stage. Now, since October 23, the vast majority of blast injuries, and these are much more serious in the sense that it's very rarely a single injury, it's often multiple body parts, there's often traumatic amputations, so people coming in, leg, arm already being ripped off with multiple shrapnel wounds, and on top of that, a huge number of burn injuries on top of that. And these require multiple trips to the operating theatre, and to just try and save the life of the patient first of all, but the rehabilitation needs and the reconstructive surgery needs going forward are absolutely enormous. The burden of problems there now, and that's the physical side. There's also, of course, the mental health and psychological issues, particularly for children who've been through this. So there's this is not a problem that stops the day the fighting stops. It will carry on for years and years afterwards. But at the moment, it's very difficult to do anything. There's a huge number of amputees. I think it has the highest percentage of amputees in children anywhere in the world by quite a long way. Those children are not currently getting fitted with prostheses. It's extremely difficult to get materials into the country. Medical staff particularly are getting, I have colleagues who have been accepted, been given a green light to go in, and then being sent back at the border because they had a stethoscope in their bag. So anything other than kind of clothing and a few personal things, it's very, very difficult to get anything into the country.
And once you said quite interesting quote that it's much better to be shot in the morning, that you have better chance to survive. So also among the people it's known that it's better to be injured in the morning than in afternoon.
I don't think probably the people know that, no, but I mean the reality is that, well certainly, say with 2018, in the Great March of Return, you know, every Friday there would be these shootings up near the fence, so it's obviously, if you haven't been there, it's a bit difficult to picture, but basically there's a wall, a huge 8-meter wall that kind of covers most of the length of the Gaza Strip, separating it from Israel, with then a kind of, it's not really no man's land because it's within Gaza, but it's a flat area spreading for a few hundred meters from that. That's all changed now because that land has been taken and is under complete Israeli control now. But people were going up and you know, it was quite a festive event at the time. People were singing and drinking coffee and shouting and chanting, and then yeah, sure, some people started throwing stones and running towards the fence, you know, and they were responded to with high-velocity sniper rifles. And the reality is, in that situation, if you have 2 or 3 injuries like that in a day, that will overwhelm a hospital in, you know, in Italy, in France, in the UK, because these are complicated cases. They require orthopedic and plastic surgery. They require long surgery. I was working in Shifa Hospital that day, and I think we admitted 240 or something, 250 within 12 hours with these. So in that case, if you were injured in the morning and got there earlier, you had more chance to get into one of the 12 operating theatres. And if you had a vascular injury, so the blood supply was cut, which was very common, then that needs to be fixed within a certain amount of time. And once you get beyond that time period, 6 to 8 hours, halas, you know, that's it. Your leg will need to be amputated. So yeah, but
do you have enough blood?
Sorry?
Do you have enough blood for transfusion?
Blood, yeah, interestingly, blood supplies are actually, or have been, reasonable, and that's partially, I think, because people are willing to donate blood. Yeah, it's certainly not. I wouldn't say it's in the amount that is needed, ideally, but you know, so you have to be very, very careful about how much you use and when. But yeah, that's been. But those, yeah, if you have a vascular injury and you come in the morning and there's still theatre space, but when you're the 50th patient and there's 12 ahead of you that need urgent cases, you know, you're going to end up losing your limb.
Gospod Aljaž, jaz ne slišim vaših vprašanj, jaz sem stara in gluha.
Pa zdaj?
Zdaj ja.
Mož.
Hvala lepa.
Have you ever lacked of equipment, for example, that you knew that for next patient there will not be enough blood, not enough other stuff?
Yeah, so this is something that I think is, you know, it's important to be absolutely truthful. The situation is absolutely bad enough and awful enough without having to, you know, add to it by saying things that aren't. You know. I have never, for example, operated on a patient without anaesthesia or some form of pain relief. There's stories that people have, you know, you hear of operations were being done without anaesthesia. Maybe that was the case in Gaza City sort of a year or so ago. It's possible. I personally have never had to do that. I would say that there's always a lack of equipment, that's for sure, and a lack of supplies and a lack of dressings. But I've never, and I've been there in, you know, fairly dire circumstances. I've never been there where we've just not been able to do anything because there's nothing, no, which is quite surprising given that there's a blockade and that, you know, since October the 23 there was nothing coming in for months and months and months. But I think that also reflects the fact that, you know, the Palestinian health system and the Ministry of Health, you know, are, you know, they're pretty effective, to be honest, and, you know, are able to plan ahead and you know they always knew and know that something like this might happen. So you know, planned well to have supplies. Now, yes, that does not mean that there's all that is needed by any sense, and there's a huge amount that needs to go in. But before or in between conflict times, it has been a well-functioning health system with, you know, sophisticated surgical techniques, sophisticated medical care. It had one of the best medical schools in the world. So, you know, it's a very sophisticated system. There's definitely a lack of things now to do the optimal treatment. And I think in certain areas at certain times that got to the point where it was very difficult to do anything other than sort of dress wounds up. But it's, yeah, in terms of resources, always more needed, but it's not zero, no.
And how difficult is for the people, especially for the kids, to accept that they will stay without hand, without leg? How big trauma is not only injury, pain, but also in the head, that for the rest of the life they will be without a limb?
Yeah, but, I mean that's very difficult to know. Obviously, I don't speak Arabic, so and I don't have time. We're sort of busy in the theatre most of the time, so you don't have lots of time to kind of talk to patients on that level particularly, but you see it certainly in children, which are by far the most devastating. When you see a 11-month-old that's had both its legs amputated above the knee and still has open wounds and everything, it kind of it crushes your sort of faith in humankind, to be honest. And these children, you know, you see some that just scream all the time, and you see others that are just very quiet. You know, they're almost catatonic. They don't do anything. They just look at you. And the sort of stories that you would hope would be a once in a lifetime experience that you might have to witness, unfortunately are daily occurrences. So, you know, I can tell you, just, you know, need one person in one hospital in one short period of time. You know, you operate on a child, 8-year-old child, that was extracted from the rubble 48 hours after the airstrike, with 30% burn injuries, shrapnel wounds, lost every single member of their family. That is not a one-off occurrence. That happens, or has been happening, day in, day out, to thousands of children.
And there is a story about a boy who lost all his family, and he's now actually in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell more about this boy and his story?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, it's perhaps a sort of a market case, if you like, that sums up everything about what's happening there. So in May, I guess, May last year, it was at the NASA hospital, because we'd been bombed out of the European hospital. So we were in NASA hospital, and one night a child was brought in who had significant injury to the arm, open fracture, nerve injuries and things. So in fact I saw this child before going into theatre, but very briefly, because it was being rushed in, and you just see a child on the table, on the trolley, you know, who's not saying anything, just looking at you with sort of frightened and stuff. And then we took them to theatre, did what was necessary, and then you see them briefly afterwards, but they're post-anaesthetic. And then you start to find out more of the story. So his mother was a paediatric doctor who was on call in that hospital. and his father was an anaesthetist who also worked in the hospital, but the father was at home with this young lad and his 10 brothers and sisters, and the mother was on call in the hospital, and again an airstrike hit their house. His father sustained a very major head injury, and he was admitted but died on intensive care 3 days later. The son was the one that we operated on now in Italy. All his other siblings, all 10 of them, were incinerated, and not blown to pieces and incinerated. And when the paramedics went to get the bodies, it was like picking bits of charcoal out of fire. And this mother was on call when her son was brought in. And for me, that was, I have to admit, that was one of the most difficult moments, is having to explain to the mother just the operation that we'd done on the son, just in terms of this is what we... I found it very difficult to look that woman in the eyes, because I felt so ashamed. Nothing to do with me, I didn't do it, but just ashamed of the human race, of what we can do to each other. And they did, the 2 surviving members of that family, that household, were thankfully evacuated sometime afterwards to Italy, and have been getting very, very good treatment here. And it's still in touch, and I actually, the child, it's quite astonishing, because I just saw him on the operating table and briefly pre and post. He's an incredibly intelligent kid. He speaks absolutely fluent English, and now he speaks pretty good Italian, and Arabic, obviously. And what I find it's humbling, but it's also just amazing, and makes you realise what we can learn from kids, if you like. He said on numerous occasions, one of the first things he said was, I want to thank everyone, all those people that helped me, all the people that helped me in Gaza, the people, I'm so lucky. He thinks he's so lucky, and I think most of us would probably think that losing all your siblings and your father, having your house destroyed, being deprived of the country is not lucky. But from his point of view, the very fact that he's still alive, he considers himself lucky.
Do you think you can get used to it that your family members are dying? I mean, everyone in Gaza has brother, sister, mother, daughter, son that is dead.
I can't imagine you can. No, I mean, I think it's you can't say, I know how you must feel. Of course you can't. I have no idea how you must feel. It's so overwhelmingly horrible, but it's also, it begs the question again about humanity. Your point about almost everyone in Gaza would have lost someone, there's over 2,000, I think 2,400 or something families that have been entirely wiped off the electoral register. So this is whole families, this is not just mother, this is extended families, mother, father, all the children, grandparents, aunts, uncles. The name has been obliterated because the whole family's been wiped out. I worked in Cambodia back in 1990, and 35 years ago, 36 now, I never came across anybody in Cambodia who hadn't lost somebody during the Khmer Rouge Revolution. Here we are 35 years later, another country, another place, same thing. We just genocide in Cambodia. I worked in Rwanda, genocide in Rwanda, genocide in Palestine. I don't understand what is wrong with the human race, but I don't think you can get over that. And I also think that it does pass in some way through generations as well. the not necessarily, you know, anger, bitterness, but there's something I think that also passes from that suffering that goes from generation to generation as well. So I think it is very, very difficult, and I don't really know what the answer to it is.
And what is more difficult, to enter Gaza or to leave Gaza for you? Because you know that you're leaving your friends, your team, that they will stay in this camp.
Yes, so from that sense, I'd say to enter is a lot easier than to leave. I mean, on a purely sort of technical level, both getting in and getting out is incredibly difficult. Last time I left, the distance is very short. It's not far at all, but it still took 14 hours or something to basically get from Gaza to back into Jordan. I mean, the distance, as I say, is not particularly long. And all the checks and the security and this, that, and the other. So getting in and out is technically very difficult, but on a sort of personal level, no, definitely leaving, because particularly now, it was different in relative peacetime, but now, you know, you just not sure you'll ever see colleagues again, because, you know, particularly working in the health sector, because so many doctors, nurses, you know, therapists, paramedics have been slaughtered during this conflict. You know, the health system has absolutely been targeted persistently and repeatedly, and others have just been taken as prisoners without any charges, nothing at all, and people don't know where they are, what's happened to them. So it's always, and the other side is the patients, because, you know, when you're there for a short period, let's say these patients need multiple procedures, and particularly, you know, plastic surgery is we're talking reconstructive, you know, surgery here, not obviously this sort of stuff. You know, plastic surgery is one of I mean, it's probably the most essential of all the surgical specialties in conflict surgery, in fact. And it's where it grew from. Most people don't know that, but plastic surgery grew out of war surgery. And then it then got tainted and misdirected into, you know, the type of plastic surgery that people think of today. But its roots are in war surgery. And there's very, very few fully trained plastic surgeons in Gaza. There was no training program within Gaza. There was only, when I first went there, I think there was 2 actual sort of fully accredited plastic surgeons. One subsequently retired. The other one, unfortunately, was doing more of the other type of plastic surgery. So, you know when you leave that often, if there's not another plastic surgeon coming, whether it's with the organisation I was with or other organisations, that, you know, these people are going to be waiting a long time before they can get another procedure that they need. And it's never nice to, you know, it's not in a doctor's kind of mindset to leave patients halfway through a treatment. You know, you follow through to the end normally. So from both sides, from the you know, leaving patients not entirely sure what's going to happen to them afterwards, and from colleagues, it is difficult. Yeah.
And when you're in this process to go in, where is this moment when you realize, okay, I'm in Gaza, everything is damaged, distracted? Is there so moment before and after on this way crossing?
Yeah. These days, it's as soon as you set foot in Gaza, because there's no part of Gaza that hasn't been touched and affected by this. But even before, so for many times I used to go in through Erez, which was the border crossing in the north, and even that, you know, you have to go through, I don't know how many turnstiles, you know, these very small turnstiles, and then you have to walk down about 1 kilometre of like a caged walkway and then through other checkpoints. So there was all this sort of series of checkpoints and security. Then at the beginning in October 23, end of October, it was through Egypt, across the Sinai and through Egypt, and that itself was a long journey. And then crossing the border, you know, as soon as you get across, you're in a completely different environment where, you know, it's just rubble and bombardments and drones and all this. And now you go in from Amman and then across Israel and through Karam Shalom or one of the other crossings, and it's been, you know, it's just reinforced, you know, these huge either wall or metal fences with then kind of big, trenches built and then manned, you know, so very much kind of defensive positions, if you like, with watchtowers and soldiers on it. So, you know, it's as soon as you get to the border, everything changes.
And once you also said that the people, Israeli soldiers on the border, are actually nice to you. And how do you see this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's you know, it is easy to make, and perfectly understandable to make generalizations about people, about populations, about cultures, about various groups, and there's obviously some, you know, some truth in that. But when it comes to any individual, I think it's important that any individual you come across, you sort of treat them to start off with a blank, open palette, if you like, and you judge them on their actions and their behaviour. You know, just because somebody comes from a certain culture or has a certain passport or a certain skin colour or a certain religion or a certain, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to behave in the same way as everybody else would. That's the sort of common thing. So yeah, you can absolutely meet, you know, on the way out, the Israeli soldiers at the crossing point were, yeah, they were very pleasant, very, you know, very helpful, very, you know, you meet all types, but yeah, it's you know, it's absolutely, it's yeah, some of them are. Now the cynics will say, oh, well, that's, you know, they've been told to do that expressly for the international staff that are leaving, and they specifically put people there and they're told to behave in that way. I don't know, you know, but I mean, no, I can only report evidence, you know, what I've happened. I've also, you know, been treated going in sometimes, you know, a bit more, they question you a bit, but no, if I'm honest, going in and out on a personal level myself, I've not had huge problems. I haven't been mistreated in any way on a personal level. I've been questioned at length sometimes, but yeah, I mean, I have colleagues who've had slightly less, slightly more difficult scenarios, let's say. But yeah, I think it does. It's just important. It does. You know, it's, you have to judge an individual as an individual, and there's good people and bad people everywhere. You know, every country, every nationality. There's good people and there's bad people.
And you're quite outspoken. You're telling everything what you see there. Do you think? Do they follow you, like Israeli government? What are you saying? Who are you? What do you tell us? What is there?
Well, I don't know, but I suspect. Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, I have. They'd probably be pretty bored following me. I have zero social media, nothing, so they're not going to find anything very interesting. But having said that, you know, like a lot of governments, but I think the Israeli government is well known that it has an extremely powerful and effective system of information gathering, intelligence gathering, etc., etc. And you know, certainly in general, and as a fact, because I have many colleagues that this has happened to, if you say things that that they don't like, put it that way, the consequences are that you just won't be, you don't get back in. So there comes a point where you have to balance, you know, yes, you want to go back and help treat patients and, you know, and operate on them and, you know, this kind of help rebuild the health system, but at what cost? You know, you also, I think it's important, you have to, there's no media allowed in, and there hasn't been since the beginning of this conflict. So I also think we have a duty to those of us who've been, you know, have been able to get into, you know, to report and to witness and to tell people what is going on there and speak truth. You know, you also don't want people that, you know, I'm not political, I'm a humanitarian, and for me it's around truth and you know, witnessing. It's not about politics, which is why I think it's so important. As I say, when people, the question you asked earlier about the resources, you know, I think people often, they kind of want me to say there's absolutely nothing and we have to operate with nothing, and you know, no, that's not true, but that doesn't in any way diminish the fact that what is going on there is absolutely horrendous. It's, you know, the breaking of international humanitarian law on a regular basis, the targeting of civilians, the targeting of health infrastructures, the targeting of education, power supplies, all this stuff is completely, you know, completely outside the rules of war.
Are you safer because you're British? Because, for example, we have an example of Dr. Hussam Safia. He was quite outspoken as well, but he was just kidnapped from Gaza and he's now in prison for more than 1 year. Is it?
I think, I mean, I'm not Britain. I actually have a French passport these days, but I think it's. I think being an outsider, let's say a foreigner, you know, European, I think, yes, I would say that absolutely gives you, I've never personally felt, you know, targeted in any way. I've had a couple of narrow escapes, but they were not, you know, they weren't specifically against me, it was just wrong place, wrong time. So, no, I don't personally feel threatened, I don't think any, I mean, there have been deaths, we know with the World Kitchen, you know, that was targeted, and a number, I can't remember, 8 or so were killed in that, and you know, there's been MSF staff that have been killed, but they're mostly been local Palestinian staff, so the risks for the Palestinian health workers are far, far, far higher, and like you say, the number of, and that's one very good example, you know, in prison for over a year now, no charges, no nothing, nobody really knows what's happening because they're not being allowed to visit and stuff. There's been, I don't know, the figures are there, I don't have them off the top of my head, but you know, the figures are there for the number of specifically health workers that have been taken into custody without any charges and just, you know, imprisoned for very long periods of time, and of course the numbers that have been killed. And I've personally lost several colleagues. One that was on some of the photos that were up before, who was killed quite early on, along with 30 members of his family. One of the leading plastic surgeons, of which there's very few, to say, in Gaza. So it's a huge risk, and the number of paramedics that have been killed, and you know, the deliberate targeting of ambulances, despite the fact that they're clearly displaying both the, you know, the red crescent or cross crescent plus the, you know, the blue lights, and have said where they're going and why they're going there. I think there's you may know there's this film coming out shortly about the young girl who was trapped when the car was shot up with her family, and she's talking to the emergency services, and then, you know, they're trying to get to her, and you know, they eventually get there, and then they're all just killed. So I on the question there.
I think
Yeah.
I think you answered it good, even if you forgot it. But how is for you both physically and mentally to see this, to doing this work from day to day? What is more difficult to process this in your mind, or just to have enough strength to wake up again next day?
I mean, physically it's exhausting because you work, if you go for a month, let's say, or 6 weeks, it's every single day. There's no, it's not Monday to Friday, I think it's every day, and usually 12 to 14 hours a day. And under quite difficult circumstances and living conditions, so it is quite physically draining, but it's for a relatively short period of time. It has one positive side effect in that you do lose weight. When I was there in October to December, I lost 10 kilos in 6 weeks, and last time I was there 4 weeks and I lost 12 kilos in 4 weeks. So from that point of view, it's quite good. Unfortunately, it comes back quite quickly. But from a sort of impact, a longer term impact on the how do you cope with it? How do you deal with it? I think when you're there, you kind of just lift up the carpet and shove it all underneath, I think, because you have to get on with the job. There's no point in being there if you're going to break down and be overcome and not be able to function. Part of it is, unfortunately, sad to say, that you get used to it, and it's after many years of this type of stuff, you do get used to it to an extent. So I guess that maybe helps. But I think it does. It absolutely has. Yeah, it can't not have an impact on you, and I think it affects different people differently. I don't have flashbacks or anything, or nightmares or anything like that. No, but I think it affects your outlook on life. It makes it more difficult to feel optimistic about things. It makes you, I think, perhaps easier to get angry about the sort of situation of the world and what's happening, and feel a little bit pessimistic, I guess, and a bit less joy in life. I think it does all those things too.
Well, let me ask you, can I ask a question? Yes. Do you think that we should streamline the process of transferring patients from Gaza, say, to our hospitals? Would that be possible for improving the recovery, or no, it would be too difficult?
That's a very interesting question, because there's sort of two sides to that argument, and one side is that there are undoubtedly thousands of patients in Gaza that are waiting and need to be evacuated for treatment that is not available there, because under normal circumstances there probably could be, but it's just there's not many things they can't do in Gaza under normal circumstances. But when all the hospitals have been, damaged, stroke destroyed, a lot of the health stuff, it's just not feasible, and the overwhelming numbers. So there are a lot of patients that, to get the best outcomes and the best futures for them, would be best treated now outside of Gaza. That process is not easy, so to streamline it would absolutely, because the longer they wait, the less good their final outcome is going to be. So on the one hand, I'd say absolutely yes. The other bit you just need to balance is does promoting the evacuation of patients from Gaza, people from Gaza, support the removal of people from Gaza who are never going to be allowed back in again. And that's, it's a difficult balance.
Also,
Yeah.
For example, here in Italy, in Slovenia, people go to hospitals for many reasons that they're not like treating. Where is the line in Warsaw that you say, okay, you're good enough, we will not even treat you, go home? How badly injured you are that you're not treated?
Well, I think that, you know, what's important to remember as well is that you know, we focus on trauma because there's so many, you know, we know about 70,000, I'm sure it's significantly more, but anyway, a minimum of 70,000 that have already been slaughtered, but there's hundreds of thousands that are injured, and the other thing is, of course, it doesn't mean that people also aren't getting cancer, diabetes, heart disease, falling over and breaking their hips, you know, needing other procedures, so we focus on the trauma side because that sort of comes to prominence, but everything else that happens under normal circumstances is also happening. Women are still giving birth, you know, often without any support, any facilities whatsoever. Children are still being born with cleft lip, cleft palate, which there's now hundreds awaiting treatment. So there's a big load of other cases, but it's all a matter of prioritising and kind of triaging under these circumstances. So something that under normal circumstances, you know, with a wound that you might, you know, take to theatre and admit and stay in hospital a day or two, no, you don't have the facility to do that. One of the principles of war surgery, in fact, anyway, is that you don't close wounds primarily because they just get infected. So, you know, they could be cleaned up in casualty and then kind of dressed, and then, you know, dressings, and they'll gradually heal on their own. It's not ideal, but you have to prioritise, and you have to try and use what resources you have, both in terms of staff and resources, to, you know, to the best you can.
How important is for you as a plastic surgeon when there is, for example, a child that has damaged face, that also that the child will be treated, also that they will have a nice face in the future, because you're traumatized if you have one big scare around your face for all your life?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I say it comes again back to the priorities. There's you know, there's a lot of ways to treat a wound, but the basic principles are the same, and the principles are to clean the wound, to prevent it getting infected, and then eventually to close it. Now, there's a lot of different ways to close a wound, and in terms of, from a plastic surgery point of view, again, there's still a hierarchy in that, you know, function comes before form. So if you can, you know, it's more important that you have a hand that works, rather than, you know, that's more important than a hand that doesn't work. And a hand that works but that has scarring on it is better than a hand that doesn't work but doesn't have scarring on it. So you try and do the best, but you also know that to get the best, for want of a better word, aesthetic result, mainly doing things that takes more time, that requires more fancy equipment, and you just can't do that. So a lot of, and that's why so many of these patients, to get the optimal outcome for them, will require further surgery down the road, because they may have, particularly with the burns, for example. So under normal circumstances, with deep, full thickness burns, you sort of treat them surgically within the first couple of weeks, and skin graft and this, that and the other. That's not possible in Gaza. When you have so many patients with burns, you don't have the kit, you don't have the time to get to theatre. So a lot of those patients will end up with more significant scars, with what we call contractures, so sort of deformities and that will need treatment later on. But having said that, I think, yes, there's still, you know, there's things that you can do that can optimize under the circumstances as best as possible, the final outcome that perhaps better done by a plastic surgeon than, say, a general or an orthopedic surgeon. So that's still true, yeah.
What you're simply just seeing on television or in social media, and you saw this with your own eyes, then how disturbing is for you then seeing Donald Trump publishing video about Gaza, Riviera, with Panama cocktails?
I have to be careful what I say here. I don't even really want to mention the name of that person who has contributed so much to making the world worse off. I mean, if I had to pick words, obscene, repulsive, disgusting, inhumane. There's not really words for it. It's just yeah. I mean, those are the sorts of words that I would use.
And you're not scared to use word genocide?
No.
Can you describe us why is this genocide?
Well, I think there's again, this is, it's around being honest and realistic and human about this. Now, lawyers may spend the next 20 years arguing around whether this is a genocide, and the final outcome may be yes it was, no it wasn't. That doesn't change what has happened. That doesn't change, and it doesn't change what I think a lot of people around the world feel and in themselves and sort of sense from what has happened there. And if you just look at the facts around what has happened and look at the deliberate targeting, I mean, it's not even hidden. That's the issue. There's statements that have come out of the Israeli government, that are clearly stated. Our aim is to force everyone down into this small area in the south, and then, God willing, they'll all leave. There's been plenty of statements coming out about, wanting that all Palestinians are, guilty, are to blame, and that there's plenty out there that shows intent, if you like, and just the figures and the statistics in terms of the numbers of people killed, the numbers of women and children killed, the amount of civilian property, the infrastructure, the cultural life, the educational life, all those things add up. And I think it's yes, I can't say it from a legal perspective because I'm not a lawyer. I'm just saying it from a human perspective and from the evidence of having been there, and what many organisations across the world who are very experienced in this, including Israelis, who are saying the same thing, and I would agree with them.
And now is also time for you to ask some question if somebody in the crowd.
Ecco, per le domande però un'istruzione prima. For you have to, because they will be in Italian, so you need a translation. Unless you understand, I mean, it's up to you. In case you need a translation, you can have it somewhere. Yeah. Otherwise, you can practice your Italian. Okay. Allora abbiamo una domanda qua, poi Wafa anche dietro, no? Ok, allora subito dopo Odinea, tu volevi fare una domanda?
Volevo far posto alla signora che deve andare via. Sì, voglio fare una domanda. I want to say hello to you, welcome to Trieste, dobrodošao u Sesku. Parlerò in italiano perché mi ha detto di parlare in italiano. First of all, prima di tutto vorrei solo dire i nomi dei 10 bambini della dottoressa Ala e di suo marito, lei è pediatra e lui non so cos'è. Posso dirlo perché penso che i nomi sono molto importanti, no? Quando muoiono i nostri.
So, I haven't got it talking yet, but I heard it's about the family of the kids.
No,
with it, yeah.
I just wanted to read the names of the 10
Ah,
children.
that's right. Yeah, I thought you said the names. I said I haven't got the names, but yeah,
Yes,
please
but
do.
because, perché penso che è molto importante dire i nomi, no? Quando muoiono i nostri figli, abbiamo visto
Sì,
i
sì.
giovani che sono morti in
Sì, sì.
discoteca, cosa abbiamo fatto qui in Europa,
Sì.
e qui ci sono migliaia di bambini morti che non sappiamo i loro nomi. Allora io vorrei dire i 10 nomi della dottoressa Ala. Aman a 12 anni e in Italia l'hanno curato,
Sì, sì.
ma desidero dire anche gli altri nomi, se mi permettete. Li leggo perché così. Samir, Kia, Raban, Yahya, Yves, Rivan, Hamdi, Rashak, non so se è giusto, e Sidrin, Aman e Vivo. Con la mamma è arrivato a Fiumicino. Io ho la fortuna di essere nel gruppo di Eyewitness Palestine americana e molte volte ho ascoltato la conferenza o qualche discorso del dottor Metz Gilbert. Quello che mi ha sconcertato è questa non avere la forza di fare di più, no? Anche noi che cerchiamo di aiutare i palestinesi. Io mi sono iscritta al Salam nel 91, il mio primo viaggio è stato nel 91 e ho detto subito qui sarà solo peggio, un giorno. E lui dice che se qualcuno dovrebbe fare un film con quello che succede a Gaza, tutti gli direbbero che è matto, che è fuori di sé, che non è possibile. Oggi mi è piaciuto che lei è stato molto umano, il dottor Potokar o Potokar, non so come dire. È stato molto umano e so che è molto difficile dire di più. Io personalmente sono disperata perché amo il popolo palestinese e da quando l'ho conosciuto da vicino non posso fare altro che dire sì, potrei fare la stessa cosa per altri popoli, ma purtroppo la mia vita è solo una e faccio quello che posso. Grazie per il lavoro che svolgete voi medici soprattutto. E poi una cosa che mi ha molto colpito è stata una mia amica che mi ha scritto da Gaza, Muna, che mi ha descritto lo stato delle donne. Loro desiderano non avere più il ciclo perché non hanno assorbenti, non hanno stracci, non hanno acqua, non hanno sapone per lavarsi. E io come donna, vecchia ormai, soffro molto per loro. Cosa pensa lei di queste donne? Come vivranno un giorno la maternità? Il loro futuro come lo vede lei come medico? Grazie. Thanks.
Grazie. So with respect to the future, and particularly the women there, I think I would love to be optimistic, but I think at this stage it's still very bleak. And I think you know, the international community has failed utterly on lots of things, but specifically with respect to Gaza. You know, I think that today we hear that phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement is coming into effect, but unfortunately we know that what comes out of the mouth of the President of the United States of America has very little bearing on reality in most cases. And the problem is we live in a world where lying has become so utterly, you know, just everywhere. It's very difficult to know what to believe in anymore. So, you can only believe what you see and hear with your own ears and eyes and stuff. And I think, you know, it's yes, I would say the situation today in Gaza is better than it was 6 months ago. But that is no way saying it's anywhere near anything that is acceptable for, you know, the population that live there. We are extremely far from any sort of justice, any sort of liberty for the Palestinian people, and also in West Bank, but we're talking more about Gaza. Right? So I think, unfortunately, the future is pretty bleak at the moment, if I'm honest. I hope things change, but...
Okay, Rafa?
If you allow me, I have just 3 quick questions for Tom. Sorry. Yeah, but first question, I know that you have been in Gaza first time 2018. I really would like, because I've never asked you this, how you were thinking about Gaza, because your first time visiting Gaza, and what changed after your first visit. The second thing, if you were, let's imagine that you were a Palestinian surgeon, what would you do more during the genocide? What do you think that you can really do more? And because you already lived, you went 2 times during the genocide, so you went through the indiscriminate bombing and also the starvation. In your opinion, what was more hard? Both of them, of course, we agree that they are crimes against humanity, but what was more hard for the Palestinians and the medical staff? It was the starvation or it was the indiscriminate bombing? And the last thing, if you can tell us one thing about Gaza that people will never hear or see on social media or the news, but you know about it.
I'm never going to remember all of those, but let's start with one. I remember the question about, let's start with the one around, if I was a Palestinian doctor, you know, a surgeon there, what would I do? Would I do anything different? I have been, you know, absolutely astonished by the courage and the strength and the dedication of the Palestinian medical and nursing and, you know, health staff in general, and I don't think they could possibly do more than they have done and are continuing to do. I had a picture sent to me today, a photo of one of the doctors that I've worked with a long time, you know, Etihad. You know, he's an orthopedic surgeon that retired quite a few years ago. He's been in every single day since the conflict started, this particular one, as have so many of his colleagues. You know, there's been staff that I know have lost you know, extensive members of their family. They're still turning up to work even the day after. Staff that have had their houses destroyed that turn up to work the next day. You know, I don't think they can do anything more than they're already doing. In terms to the sort of starvation versus the bombardment, they're sort of cumulative. I mean, obviously bombardment is brutal and pretty indiscriminate. Starvation is a much cheaper way of killing people. And once you've sort of bombed them into a state of you know, after 2 years of just complete psychological and physical being worn out, to then, you know, turn the final screw and stop any food getting in is not only illegal but cynical, and you know, and we have to remember that starvation has multiple impacts. So it prevents wound healing, it increases the risk of infections, it compromises your immune system, but it also has a significant psychological impact, and you know, it wears people out physically to the point where, you know, they just can't do the amazing job they were doing because they just have no strength left. So I think it's you know so I think they're cumulative, and whether one is worse than the other, I think that's difficult to say. But I think they're you know, to have the starvation coming on top of 2 years of what has been going on is you know, it's a method as well of kind of psychological, just, you know, trying to beat people into losing faith, losing their heart, just sort of losing the will to live almost. And last time I was there, you know, I noticed, certainly with some people, their, you know, will had finally been beaten out of them, and they were just sort of, well, you probably won't see me next time, I'll probably, you know, be dead. So I think it, you know, it has that impact. And then the first, if I remember, the first question about the first time I went to Gaza, it's a very, it's a place that's, if I'm honest, the Middle East didn't particularly interest me for many. I've been working in the humanitarian sector on and off since 35 years, and I went a lot to Indochina, Asia, Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and only to the Middle East region probably 15 years or so ago maybe. And now I've been to pretty much all the, you know, the destinations, you know, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Gaza, West Bank, Afghanistan, all those sort of areas around there. And there is, it's like that, there's some film title, isn't there? There's something about, I mean, there is something about Gaza that gets under your skin, and which I didn't know or expect particularly, but I recognise it, and I've seen it in many, many, many colleagues. And why is that? It's a little bit difficult to say. I think it's a multitude of things. I think it's particularly when you've been to lots of other places that in some ways you think, well, it's similar, there's conflict going on there. It's something about the fact that you have this very small geographical region with so many people crammed into it who are wonderful people, highly educated, intelligent, compassionate, kind people, that are treated so unjustly and are being abandoned by the rest of the world. And I think that just, you know, once you've been there and you've experienced that, it's sort of, I think that's what brings so many people to go back and not want to give up. It's difficult to turn your back on that situation and the people there once you've been there.
And the last question was, what do you know about Gaza that is not known?
Oh, it's a secret. No, I don't. What do I know about Gaza that no? I'll have to have a little think. If I can think of something specific before the end, I'll say.
Ok, c'era un signore prima che mi ha chiesto, no, per una domanda, che altro avrebbe, perché entro le 7:30 dobbiamo 1, 2, 3, anche signor. Ok, allora 1, 2, 3 e 4. Anche Nabil. E la prima è signora.
O in inglese o in italiano?
In italiano, forse così tutti. Volevo chiedere, lei è stato dal 2018 dalla marcia del ritorno, quindi ha visto Gaza tanti anni, e volevo sapere, noi abbiamo avuto dai media, non più adesso perché non ci sono più gli ospedali, ma per 1 o 2 anni che gli ospedali erano i luoghi dei comandi dei guerriglieri palestinesi. Lei ha mai curato dei guerriglieri palestinesi in questi lunghi anni? Le è mai capitato? Ha mai dovuto curare soldati, guerriglieri? Per noi è stata come dire, il mantra era questo. Gli ospedali erano, allora volevo sapere da lei. E poi faccio ancora un'altra domanda, la seconda domanda. rispetto al 2018, alla marcia del ritorno, c'era Gaza, cioè c'era le città. Lei come medico ha avuto il tempo, il modo, o non c'è il tempo, il modo per un chirurgo, ha avuto il tempo di capire se c'è la percezione attorno a sé che non c'è più Gaza, cioè, e quindi che cosa ci potrà essere, perché salvarsi, perché curare. Questa sensazione di vuoto l'ha percepita nelle persone attorno a lei?
Okay, thank you. So the question about fighters in the health facilities, hospital compounds, underground tunnels, this, that, and the other. I have visited numerous hospitals in Gaza numerous times over 8 years now. Personally, I have never seen anything remotely suspicious or anything outside of what would happen in a normal hospital. I've never seen any arms, nothing at all, nothing. Having said that, I think that there also needs to understand that, to say, coming back to this population of 2 million people living in 35 by 8 kilometers, where are fighters going to, they'll be all over, there's not that many of them anyway out of that population, and they could be anywhere. But in terms of them being, I have never seen personally, neither have I seen any evidence produced and shown to the international community to ever reinforce or provide evidence for that. I was in the European Gaza when it got hit. I was 50 meters away maybe from, and I was there within a minute. I just saw big craters, nothing else. Didn't see anything else other than big craters, all within the hospital compound. The interesting question, have I ever operated on, whatever you want to call them, whether it's, Hamas fighters, resistance fight, whatever you want. That's. I always find that an interesting question because as a doctor, I find it a slightly. No, I understand it, but I always slightly, why that. I would operate on the person in need, whether they're wearing an IDF outfit or a Hamas outfit. That's, So have I don't know. I've no idea. Probably. I don't know. I don't ask questions. I don't. I don't.
You have never seen.
In all the times I've been there, have I actually seen? No, I probably haven't, to be honest. I don't think I've ever seen. You see on television people chanting, and have I ever seen that personally? No.
Okay.
Never. I mean, as I say, I can only say what I've seen. No, never. Have I operated on? I've operated on mostly women and children, but yeah, of course I've operated on men as well. And I have no idea, and I don't care. As I say, if somebody brought me in, somebody wearing an IDF outfit, of course I can operate on exactly the same way. That's not my. I just treat the people. I don't judge them.
Wasn't there a second question?
Yes, probably. I don't know. Have I answered them?
No. Okay.
No.
So let's
No, I
go.
think I did it too.
Oh, do you want to say something?
No.
No. Grazie.
Abbiamo visto che da servizi giornalistici abbiamo visto che i fornimenti di cibo sono spesso stati distrutti dai militari israeliani e mi sono meravigliata che prima lei diceva di avere sufficiente sangue, sacche di sangue, anche se poi si esaurivano nel corso della giornata. Quindi ci sono ancora le distruzioni di cibo da parte dei soldati israeliani
E poi da dove riceve lei, medico, i rifornimenti dei generi sanitari, bende, cerotti, disinfettanti, medicine, siringhe? E poi chi paga voi medici internazionali? Voi da chi siete pagati?
Okay, so to start with the last point first, who pays you? I don't get paid when I go to Gaza. I don't have any salary or payment when I go there. But obviously, the getting people there, flights and transport and all that is covered, and that's covered by the organisations that I've worked for, and I've worked for different organisations over the years. Some organisations pay their staff, sure, some people but the funding comes from those organisations. So whether it's MSF or Ideals or Medical Aid for Palestinians or the International Red Cross, they have their own funding. In terms of the food, again, I can only, I will only speak to my experience. I have never seen personally Israeli soldiers taking food supplies. I haven't seen that. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened, obviously, but I haven't seen that, so I can't really comment on that one way or the other. In terms of the other supplies coming in, so before October the 7th, there was, things were able to come in. There was somewhere in the region, I think 600 trucks a day on average going into Gaza, carrying everything from food supplies, medicines, building materials, all sorts of stuff. Obviously that dropped to zero for quite a few months. In between times, so between 2018 and then of course there was a flare up in 2021, I think, I was there then as well. But in between times, we would often bring in, the organisation I worked for, we would bring in kit ourselves. So sometimes we'd have 18 suitcases, the 4 of us to lug through all these and that would tend to be specific surgical equipment, external fixators, special frames, plastic surgery kit. The World Health Organization has brought in huge amounts over the years. And then each organisation, say whether that's MSF, whether they all bring their stuff in as well. And then there's other big donors such as the Qatari government that supply huge amounts of materials and funds and antibiotics. So there's a lot of different, both organisations but also kind of government, support providing materials. But obviously that stopped in the initial stages because nothing was allowed across the border to start off with, which is why then those stocks have gradually diminished over that period of time. Was there another thing else?
Signor Consen, no? Era una domanda,
Sì,
poi c'era,
forse c'era anche
c'era la
prima.
signora e Nabil.
Sì, io faccio per ultimo.
Ok, allora la signora, abbiamo 10 minuti.
Sì.
Allora, io ho una domanda che mi faccio tante volte. Come, vista la sua esperienza, ci può spiegare perché oggi vediamo quello che succede quando uno pensa alla seconda guerra mondiale, all'olocausto, a quello che è successo, l'essere umano non ha proprio capito niente, perché chi ha subito quelle cose terribili non ha dato ai propri figli un messaggio positivo e ha permesso che oggi Israele faccia quello che sta facendo. È una cosa che a me tormenta. Io so che non tutti la pensano così, che c'è anche una dissidenza nell'ambito dello Stato, però è una cosa terribile quello che noi stiamo vedendo. C'è speranza in questo mondo che qualcosa cambi in positivo o sarà sempre peggio? La ringrazio.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm in a position to answer that any better than anybody else in here. You know, why? It's a very big question. Absolutely, why are people like, and not just, you know, as I said, it's in many different places. I think it's complicated for a start. I don't think there's sort of one reason. I think there's an awful lot of reasons, and I do think it's really important to understand the you know, what's behind all this. And obviously we feel when we see these atrocities and the horrific things that are going on, including the attack on October the 7th or whatever, you know, when 1,200 people were killed as well. That, you know, there's so much there: history, politics, you know, morality, ethics. As I say, this kind of generational, kind of inherited misunderstandings. You know, we've seen it in the region here with you know, in Bosnia, and what happened in Bosnia and what happened in Kosovo, and you know, all these kind of things. So I don't know the answer, and I think we have to really look for that answer and try and understand it, because otherwise we're just setting up a continual cycle of violence, you know. And there has to be understanding, however difficult it is. We, the human population, you know, we need to try and understand both points of view. We can feel very strongly what is right and wrong, absolutely, but we also have to try and understand what we feel is wrong. You know, why do people feel like that? Why do they react like that? Why do they? And I was talking earlier with Adiash, you know, I think we can go back to 9/11 in America, you know, after the attacks on the Twin Towers, and you know, the response to that was not an intelligent response, and it's just created this ongoing, you know, how many hundreds of thousands, millions of people have been caused as a result of that because of a completely unintelligent, ill thought out, unwise reaction to a horrible event. But there needs to be, you know, also some understanding. Okay, why do people do this? A kind of a moment of pause, and sort of, and you know, we've seen it in South Africa. You know, the Reconciliation Committee after the end of apartheid in South Africa. So I think we have to have hope that it is possible, and try and keep a tiny little flicker of optimism going there, that we will be able to eventually, you know, find some solutions for this. But I think it can only be done through, you know, you can't create peace from war, really. You can't create peace from peace. And there just has to be more dialogue, more understanding. But that also requires the right leadership. And you know, that is one of the biggest problems globally at the moment. It is such incompetent, immoral leadership, and that is one of the fundamental problems. You know.
Buonasera a tutti e grazie per il dottor Potokar. Un pensiero, poi una domanda. Il pensiero è, credo per la speranza o non speranza, credo anche lì la gente di Gaza, tutta la gente di Gaza, ci hanno dimostrato che l'insistenza alla cercare la miglior vita, ancora oggi, nonostante il genocidio, nonostante tutta la descrizione che il dottor Potokar ha descritto, ci hanno dato anche gli esempi di resilienza e anche di forte impulso verso la vita. Basta pensare alla più di 200 neolaureati in medicina appena laureati 2 settimane fa, credo, a tutti gli studenti della maturità che hanno fatto gli esami di maturità e hanno passato. Per cui La speranza c'è, dobbiamo credere nella gente che cerca la vita e anche sostenerli in quello. La domanda è, per quanto riguarda le organizzazioni internazionali che saranno espulse o sono state già espulse dalla Palestina in generale, ci può dire, se lo sa, quali sono i punti di disaccordo tra queste organizzazioni e il governo israeliano, e se secondo lei questo è un indicatore che una volta non siamo riusciti a far entrare i giornalisti, abbiamo ucciso i giornalisti palestinesi e adesso stiamo togliendo anche l'ultimo testimone, che sono le organizzazioni internazionali con un minimo di etica e che fanno anche da testimoni. Forse se vuole continuare col genocidio ancora? Grazie.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think there's, for the organisations that have been banned recently, there's the official explanation, if you like, and perhaps something a little bit more behind that as well. So the official explanation is because those organisations refuse to comply with the requirements of the Israeli authorities to register and give specific details about their staff, both expatriate and Palestinian staff, which would go against what would normally be considered data protection, rules here perhaps. So that's the official reason. And I think it's important, just because some people sometimes, the sort of how to get into Gaza, it's important that people understand that to get into Gaza, of course it should be the decision of the Palestinians, but actually it has nothing to do with the Palestinians. It's entirely controlled by the Israelis. Entirely controlled by the Israelis. So when you hear very senior American officials at the highest level of government saying, oh, well, you've got into Gaza because you're being supported by Palestinians and Hamas and what, it just shows you that they haven't got a clue what they're talking about, because getting into Gaza has nothing to do with the Palestinians, it's entirely controlled by Israelis. I think behind that, it does seem that that I think as well the organisations, certainly some of them, who have contributed a huge amount, such as various branches of Médecins Sans Frontières, Medical Aid for Palestinians, both who are on those lists now, and are going to have a significant impact because they've been doing a huge amount. They're also organisations that are not afraid to stand out and call out what has been happening there. So I think it's a mixture. So the official is all because they haven't done this documentation, but I suspect behind that there's other more political, inverted commas, reasons why they've been banned. Was there a second question?
No, there was a thought and a question.
Yeah, thought, and thank you. And I agree with your thought. Yes, you're right. We do have to not give up and despite everything, try and remain optimistic. I agree with that, but it's difficult.
Allora, io innanzitutto voglio ringraziare lei e tutti coloro che appunto l'hanno aiutata oggi a condividere queste drammatiche esperienze. Voglio ovviamente ringraziare Lorella Bucci che ha reso possibile questo e poi tutti voi che siete qui. Ci sono due domande che non sono mie, ma che penso lei potrà rispondere. La prima è: lei deve una risposta a quella signora che chiedeva laggiù qualche cosa che lei ha visto e che non potremo altrimenti sapere. Se le è venuto in mente, lei ce lo dica. La seconda domanda, che non è mia, e invece abbiamo visto delle immagini drammatiche quando siamo entrati, se ci può dire chi sono quelle persone. Sarebbe giusto, come ha fatto l'idea, dire i loro nomi perlomeno. insomma, almeno ci dica chi sono queste persone che abbiamo visto. E poi c'è la domanda che volevo farle io, ed è questa: lei, da quanto ho capito, è stato in tante zone di guerra, in tanti teatri di guerra. Ora volevo sapere se dalle ferite che lei ha visto sulle vittime si può, sono diverse rispetto ad altre guerre, perché magari queste sono provocate da bombe o da droni. Forse la ferocia è anche legata al fatto che la guerra adesso la facciamo o la fanno attraverso, appunto, strumenti che non danno la percezione a chi perpetra la violenza, non danno la percezione della violenza. Volevo capire se sono le stesse tipi di ferite o se sono diverse. Grazie.
Thank you. So with respect to the slides, so I think bar two of them, they're my images. They're not. That's why they're not very good. But they're all from those. I think they're all from Gaza since October the October 23. And there's a mixture. Some were from the European Gaza Hospital. Some were from Nasser Hospital, some were from Al-Amal Hospital, and some were just general sort of scenery around what was just going through Khan Yunis, etc. And then the question about the types of injuries. So there's often a lot of questions about the injuries, rightly so, and I think it's very important, again, just to always base things on sort of evidence and truth. And I have colleagues who say, oh, well, it doesn't mean that this type of weapon was being used, that type of weapon, or cluster bombs, or this one, or phosphorus, and blah blah blah. And it is really that's very much an expert field. I have colleagues that try and say, oh, this type of bullet was used. So in 2018, there was a lot of questions around, oh, have dum-dum bullets. So these are unjacketed or semi-jacketed bullets that are illegal to use in military situations. And again, my answer, and I gave evidence to the United Nations in Geneva. I said, look, I can just show you the results and what I've seen and pictures of this, that, and that. I don't know what weapon was used. Could a weapon like that cause this type of injury? Yes. But it could also be caused by a bullet that has hit the ground and ricocheted off. It has exactly the same effect. So, people might say, this is the entrance wound, this is the exit wound, because this wound is bigger, so it must... It's not that easy. And if you speak to ballistics experts, then it really makes you realise that as a physician or a surgeon, you shouldn't be making comments around the types of ballistics, because there's a whole science to it. But in terms of these particular injuries, since the 23, no, I'd say they're not unusual in the sense that I haven't seen other things. It's just the quantity and the extent. And I think you have to look, as I say, at the environment. This very small, so this is high explosives being used in an extremely dense urban environment, and that kind of explains the type of injuries we're getting. So they are typical blast injuries, and that's what a blast injury does, multiple shrapnel wounds. There were a huge number of burns. I have never seen this many burns in any other conflict as is in Gaza. That's all I can say. Does that mean a certain type of... Well, every time I saw bombs hit, it was the normal, what you see, if you like. You hear the noise, you see the explosion, the building goes up, there's a huge plume of smoke. Not necessarily flames. I didn't see anything unusual, but there were a very, very large number of burns associated with this. is that a reflection of, again, being used in urban areas? There's lots of cars, they blow up as well, there's petrol, people use gas. I don't know, but there were a lot of burn injuries, more than I've seen elsewhere. And something that people wouldn't know or haven't seen, that's still difficult. I mean, yes, there's, but I mean, nothing I'd say suspicious, if you like. There's lots of things that people haven't seen in the sense of, the behaviour of individuals, of the look on a mother's face when she's just lost all her children, or the look of two kids on a hospital bed. One day there was a strike that was near Alamal Hospital, and a huge chunk of shrapnel came through the emergency department, and two young kids were brought in, covered in dust, screaming, and just placed on a stretcher. And those sort of images we don't tend to see on the news, and of course it's important as well to. The newsreels are, it's one perception, the visual and perhaps noise, but you don't smell the. If you go onto a ward full of patients with infected wounds, you can't smell the stench of rotting flesh. And when you take the dressings off and it's full of maggots, you don't see that on the news. You don't get the whole experience. You get sort of edited video that doesn't show the real horror because people don't want to show pictures of decapitated children. But I think that's the reality.
Bene, adesso noi abbiamo finito, no? Purtroppo però do l'ultima parola a Yash Raves che voleva aggiungere qualcosa. Se poi lei signore vuole fare una domanda dopo magari.
Era solo un piccolo intervento con una valenza più morale, etica. Io sono un medico. Lei prima ha detto che parlando con quella madre si vergognava, forse is better, yes, si vergognava della specie umana. Io direi che è una frase assoluta, perché è giusto che si vergognasse di una parte della specie umana, perché è come dire io mi vergogno just a moment.
Sì, deve parlare, venga qui, deve parlare al microfono, però
sì.
Sia breve perché purtroppo abbiamo la sala solo fino alle 7:30 che sono passate.
Mi premeva di parlare, dunque io faccio parte di un gruppo che si chiama Sanitari per Gaza, che è una rete nazionale e ce l'abbiamo anche in Friuli, ma parlo a titolo personale. Innanzitutto veramente la ringrazio, collega, di aver fatto questo intervento e soprattutto per quello che fa. E nel momento in cui lei dice mi sono vergognato della specie umana, è come se dicessi io mi vergogno della comunità medica. No, io non mi vergogno della comunità medica, mi vergogno della comunità medica internazionale e nazionale che non ha mosso un dito. Potrei farvi degli esempi personali per cercare di coinvolgere gli ordini dei medici, i direttori sanitari e i sindacati medici. Non ho avuto quasi nessuna risposta. Ora noi abbiamo fatto, forse anche in Francia, il giuramento, che si chiama giuramento di Ippocrate. Ebbene, noi vediamo queste scene e la classe medica internazionale non ha il coraggio, non ha la forza di imporre la sua opinione negativa nei confronti di quello che sta succedendo, e non ci sono giustificazioni. Perché sul Ruanda non vedevamo, sulla Cambogia non vedevamo, su altre situazioni drammatiche non vedevamo, per esempio in Somalia, ma lì vediamo tante cose e sentiamo testimonianze eccezionali come quella che oggi ha dato lei. Complimenti di cuore.
Solamente titolo 100% d'accordo. 100%
And I just want to add one nice story in this head. Wafa, that she's tonight with us, she's one of the first one you met in Gaza. And you probably never thought that one day you will meet her in your homeland somehow, of your father.
Yes, absolutely. Wafa, who's at the back there? Hello, Wafa. Wafa I met in 2018. And in Gaza, and next to her is her husband Mohammed, and Mohammed represents, by his presence here, all those paramedics, because he was in the ambulance service in Gaza, and those guys are incredible. So I think we should give them a big hand. And yes, I didn't, when I remember having a conversation with Wafa in the car outside the Al Mahdath Hotel. We were talking about, I think we were talking in French, in fact, because Wafa speaks French as well as Slovene and Arabic and English and everything else. And yeah, you don't imagine at that point, if somebody said, oh, maybe one day you'll meet in Slovenia or something. Strange turns that life takes. Yeah, absolutely.
Ecco, do la parola adesso a Lorella Bucci che con piacere vi saluterà.
Sì, prima di cadere. Niente, veramente i tempi sono stretti perché abbiamo sforato e poi sono, molto ligi all'orario. Non posso che associarmi alle parole già dette e soprattutto anche da Nazareno, dai sanitari per Gaza, le ultime che veramente concludono meglio di qualsiasi cosa potrei dire io rispetto a quello che succede e a ciò che ha testimoniato oggi Tomo Potokar insieme ad Agar Verbez, per cui grazie davvero di essere qua, per cui credo che adesso meriti davvero alla fine un applauso, no? Grazie da parte di tutti noi, un abbraccio per quello che hai fatto, fai e farai, per cui pensaci quando sarai di nuovo a Gaza, noi saremo un po' con te, magari solo con l'emozione, col pensiero, ma saremo, perché ce l'abbiamo sempre comunque nel cuore e nel pensiero. Grazie. Vi ricordo alcune iniziative che saranno nei prossimi giorni, già che siete qua. Una è il contrasto alla partecipazione di Israele alle Olimpiadi e alla fiaccola olimpica che arriverà a Trieste, quindi noi saremo presenti a contrastarla. E una cena palestinese che sarà il 31 gennaio a supporto di quello che diceva già Odinea inizialmente. I fondi andranno per i vestiti dei bambini che hanno freddo in questo momento a Gaza. Grazie.
Il 31 mattina vi aspettiamo tutti quanti a Opcine alla presentazione del Peace Walk to Jerusalem.
Grazie agli interpreti che hanno dato il loro